All right, this is a response video to a position paper that was put out by the Assemblies of God denomination in the States. Now, what they've done is they've put out a position paper um, which is responding to Reformed theology. And as you see there at the start, the growing popularity of Reformed theology among younger ministers and ministerial students has caught the attention of the contemporary evangelical movement in the Americas and elsewhere. Okay, yeah, great. So the Calvinists are on the move. They're everywhere, even in the Assemblies of God, which is traditionally a Arminian denomination. And so, yeah, they are. They're trying to respond to that. And what they've done in this position paper, it's 6 pages long, they sort of present, okay, this is what Calvinism is, this is what Arminianism is, where do they agree, where do they differ. They're trying to say, hey, we're all Christians here, but we just disagree with this, with these and these points. And so they're trying to state that and basically show what their position is in relation to this new rise in the popularity of Calvinism. All right, so they say that these are the sort of the main two positions: Calvinism or Reformed theology and Arminian theology. Now, there's lots of things that can be said here, like to debate some of the points they're making, things about history. They say Calvin is not a Calvinist and the first Baptists were Arminians. Both of those can be disputed. They say that Calvin's central idea, it always bugs me when people say, this is Calvin's main idea. I read the entire Institutes and read part of his commentaries and stuff. I could never discern some central idea. When you ask theologians or historians about it, they always have some different opinion on what the central concept is in Calvin's writing, so I would just ignore that. What else can we say? It's an interesting point here. They say that Reformed thinkers have written more. Because go to your library or go to a theological library and see who's written more. It's hard to find any Arminians because everyone's a Calvinist. It's all the Presbyterians and the Reformed guys, and the great thinkers of the church have leaned. It's like the Reformed team is pretty strong on paper. Anyway, but they said one of the reasons for this is that Arminianism is it's the instinctive position, it's the common sense position. It doesn't demand a complex philosophical argument, but it seems to more naturally fit a straightforward reading of the Bible. Whereas Calvinism, now you need to come up with some extravagant philosophical system, some theologizing to rationalize it. I would grant that most people who are untrained, who just read the Bible with their natural thinking without having their brain conform to the Word of God, Arminianism does appeal to them more. That when you are born, you have a more Pelagian attitude rather than, no one's going to come up with a Reformed theology because it's so God-centered. It doesn't elevate man. So, of course, people who haven't had to have their mind changed by the Bible won't find this initially compelling. Anyway, so that's something to say about that. They point out, they go through the tulip, the 5 points of Calvinism, saying this is what the Arminians believe, this is what the Calvinists believe. I'm not going to go over all of that right now, even though there's points that a Calvinist would contest in some of that. I want to get to this, where they talk about points of disagreement. This is interesting. They say the primary differences lie in what may easily be construed as the removal of human responsibility, particularly with regard to irresistible grace and election. And so this seems to be their primary warning, or their worry about Calvinism, is that it removes human responsibility. All right, now this is a problem. Look further down here. God's choice, they were talking about if all is truly preordained and God's choice is the only active agent in salvation, it may mean that basically the sinner can't be blamed for his sin, but it's actually God's fault. Now, this is not right, because no Calvinist should say that humans have no agency. They do have agency, but the problem is humans are able to make choices, but they always choose the bad, the evil. They never choose to be saved. they are unable to do that. So God has to change their will. God has to work into them a new heart, a new desire, so that they desire the things of God, and therefore then they do choose the things of God. So look, unless you choose to follow God, you will never be saved. I'm saying as a Calvinist that it's utterly necessary for someone to choose God. But the only reason if anyone can choose God is because God first chose them. So that's silly. Now, look, the logical inference that missions work is not needed or desirable. Okay, and now I really want to push back against the Arminian here, because on Arminianism, missions is optional. Missions is great. It's commanded by God, and Arminians, but it's up to them whether they're going to do it or not. All the Arminians or all the Christians in the world can, if Arminianism's true, we can ignore it and we say, yeah, God said we should do missions, but we're not going to do it, and then no one's going to get saved because no one went to go preach the gospel. Okay, but on Calvinism, missions is not optional, and it is not. It's certainly, of course, it's needed and desirable. First of all, because God commanded it and said it, and God has given us a desire in our hearts to want to do it as well. So it is needed and desirable. But the other thing is too, on Calvinism, missions is utterly necessary, and missions are foreordained. For us, missions is predestined. We know that missions will happen. God has predestined not only that the elect will be saved, but He's predestined that they will be saved by missions. He's preordained and commanded us that we should go and be missionaries and preach to them, because if we don't go and preach to them, then no one will hear the gospel, and then no one will get saved. So for us, we have a stronger doctrine of missions in that we believe missions is never optional. It is, and it certainly will happen, because the missions itself has been predestined. Whereas on Arminianism, it's all up to us whether we're going to go or not. We could just ignore it, like a lot of people are doing, or we can obey the command and do it. So I hope, I really want to put that one to rest, this charge about Calvinism's supposed lower view of missions. The hopelessness of reprobation, they're saying that this is sort of a logical inference here. How could you preach to people? Some people just cannot receive the gospel. They cannot be saved. Well, that's fine, but the only reason why they cannot be saved is because they will not be saved. They don't want to be saved, and so they hate God and they reject God absolutely, and that's it. So we cannot. We offer the gospel to absolutely everyone. Anyone who wants to come, everyone who wants to be saved can be saved. Just turn to Jesus, and then you will be saved if you want that. But the reprobate don't want that at all, and that's why they won't have it. The haughtiness of perseverance, well, that is silly too, because you cannot be haughty about your perseverance, because another way, it's not just the perseverance of the saints, it's the preservation of the saints. So the only reason why we persevere in faith is because God preserves us in faith. He is the one holding us in His hand, and so no one can take us out of His hand. But there's no haughtiness in that. The Calvinist position is the position of grace, right? We're saying that it's only because of God's grace that I'm saved, and so somehow to pretend now that there's a haughtiness that could come from perseverance is silly. These guys, the Assemblies of God guys, are quite strongly against the doctrine, the fifth point of Calvinism, there's perseverance of the saints, or eternal security, or they really don't like once saved, always saved. And look, they call that an extreme position. Sometimes it's once saved, always saved. So this is so preposterous, really, because what? So once I'm born again, I'm always born again. That's what we mean. Okay? Once I have the Spirit of God in me, I cannot have that leave me. Once I'm a new creation, I cannot become an old creation again. You understand? This is not an extreme position. It's the only position that makes any sort of sense. And that's why even among Arminians, most Arminians, or the Baptists, I don't meet anyone it's hard to find someone who says you can lose your salvation. Because how do you become unborn again? How do you become, you were a new creature, now you're not a new creature anymore? That is much harder to believe that could happen. Anyway, and that's why the Remonstrants in 1610, when those are the initial 5 points of Arminianism, they didn't even land on that one. They said, well, hey, we don't know about this one. We're going to have to study it some more to figure out, can you lose your salvation or not? Anyway, so I think I've dealt with some of that stuff. Let's just go down a little bit more. they warn about, they say, yeah, Calvinism is Christianity, but this hyper-Calvinism, the extreme form of Reformed theology is called hyper-Calvinism, where the individual, as noted above, has no involvement in either salvation or reprobation. Okay, well, I am not defending hyper-Calvinism. I utterly reject that completely, because if a hyper-Calvinist is saying that somehow man does not have to make a choice for God, then I completely reject that. I'm saying, of course you must make a choice for God, but the only people who can make a choice for God are the people who have received the grace from God and able to respond in that way, and not everyone has received that grace, that saving grace, even though they have received common grace, because if they had received that particular grace, then they would respond. All right, so they talk here about Calvinists and Arminians working together. They give the example of Wesley and Whitefield. Well, Wesley was pretty nasty to Whitefield, so that's all I'll say about that. You can read Arnold Delamore's biography of George Whitefield and decide for yourself. Last thing, it is when Reformed thinking is extended and taken to the extreme of removing all human response that we must reject it. Okay, yeah, that's right. If a Calvinist is saying that a human must make no response to God, then we must reject it. I will reject it myself if it said that. So I think that's all I wanted to say. There's one more point up here somewhere that I wanted to this thing here, asserting that there is essentially no human agency in responding to God's call and salvation. This is weird too, because we have to distinguish between the external call of the gospel and the inward effectual call of God. So does the Arminian distinguish between that? I want to know. Because the Calvinist, we're saying we both respond to the external call, and you respond to the internal call because you are first regenerated. You first have regeneration comes first. I'm made alive. Now I am able to respond. I'm no longer dead in sin. And then, yes, I respond to God. I have faith in Him. And then I am justified. I'm declared righteous on the basis of my faith, which was the response to the regeneration that the Holy Spirit did in my life. So that's how we understand that salvation. So the human person is very much involved in their salvation, but they don't affect their own regeneration. Okay, you first have to be alive for you to then be able to do anything after that. So that is what we are saying. Of course, we are very much responsible for going on missions, for praying, for our sanctification. We work together with God. But the reason why we work together with God is because God has given us the grace to be able to do so. If He hadn't given us those graces, then we would not even do that. So that's my response to this position paper from the Assemblies of God from 2015. I don't know who's going to watch this, but I wanted to put it out there in case you are still learning about Calvinism and Arminianism, trying to find your own beliefs on that. So hope this helped.